Okay, great. Thank you, Fernanda. Hi, everyone. My name is Yelter Meers. I'm the research editor at the Pulitzer Center. Our data and research team, what we do is we help fellows and our grantees with their investigations. So we help them look into money flows and supply chains, for example. So today I'm going to be talking about investigating the investors. Um, I'm going to start my slideshow here. This presentation is based on a methodology that we published about a week ago. Me and my colleague Madeline, who will also be joining, and we'll be talking later on. In this slide, you will see a link to the methodology story, and in this story, go into greater detail compared to what we cover today in the webinar. So this will be our program during my session. So first, I'm going to talk about why we have to look at investors. I'm going to talk about some ways of checks and balances when it comes to investments. Then I'll talk actually about the methodology, how to look at investors starting from the companies, starting from the investors, and then my colleague Madeline is going to be talking about the role of development banks. So why would you look at investors? In our previous methodology stories, we talked about how to uncover the ownership of companies, for example. And in an upcoming methodology story, we will be talking about how to follow the supply chains. So what we really try to do is we try to show all the ways that we assist our fellows and how our journalists themselves uncover the people that need to be held accountable for any kind of environmental destruction. And investors play a really big role because they allow for certain companies to develop certain projects. They choose where the money goes and which kind of developments happen across the world. So just a little check on what are investors. So investors are not necessarily shareholders, but they can be. The difference is that when you look at the company and the owners, the shareholders, they will own a part of a company and are part owners. They will partake in decision-making, whereas investors do not partake in decision-making. They just front the money. Oops. This is an example of one of our former fellows who will also be talking today, Gloria. She looked into how European development banks have put money into palm oil that's been polluting a part of the DRC. So now let's go to checks and balances. So a really great place to start reporting on the investors is to look at the organizations that are already kind of holding them to account. There's a lot of them. Here are some examples. You have Earthside, Sustainalytics, EcoVadis, the Rainforest Action Network. But there's a big caveat here. Some of these kind of watchdog organizations are very close to the industries. So some of them are actually partaking in some sort of greenwashing, potentially, because they're really close to the industries and they just kind of give a stamp of approval to an investment fund, for example, or a bank. Whereas if as a journalist you start digging deeper, you see that they actually should not get any kind of stamp of approval. And then on the other side, a lot of them are also activist groups. So they might have some sort of agenda, so as a journalist, you always have to double check what they say. So good starting points for leads, but be careful of those sources. Then let's start with investigating the investors themselves by yourself, starting from the companies. So for example, if you know a certain company is doing something bad environmentally or in any other way, you will want to see who is investing in this company, who's supporting this company financially. So we're going to go over two types of companies here, and then I'm also going to dig a little bit into company accounts, but we'll keep it very short. Please refer to the methodology piece to see a deeper analysis. So public companies are companies that are traded on stock markets. Generally, they will have documentation about their investors and shareholders on their websites. There's usually an investors section on a company website that will tell you everyone who's investing in them, which institutions, which other companies are investing in them. And then if you can't find that on the company's respective website, it's very likely this will be listed on the website of the stock exchange. So I put here links, which will be accessible once you get the presentations afterwards by email to the listings. So these are the listings of the stock exchanges that say which companies are there. And then when you click on those, you can see who's investing in them. So here I have an example of the Coca-Cola company, a very famous company. On the left, on the upper left corner of the screen, you see what you can find on their website. I know it's a little bit small if you don't have a big monitor at home. But as you can see, there's an annual report to security holders. There's specific reports pursuant to sections. These are sections. These are necessary filings they have to do for the Security and Exchanges Commission in the US. And these documents will show you who is investing in the company. But on the other hand, you can also just go on the stock exchange website, and there you can click on the company, and then you will see all the institutional holders, which is institutions that have invested in the company. For private companies, it's a little bit different. They are not always required to file documents about their financials, i.e. about their investors. But if they're of a certain size, like for example, if they have over 100 employees, or if they have over, I don't know, 1 million in capital, they're usually required to file those documents in the company registry of the country they're registered. In a previous story, where we dig deep in uncovering the ownership of companies, we show how to get information from a company registry. Once you get company accounts from a private company, you'll see that they will include different parts, and some of these will tell you information about the investors in the company. For example, you have the breakdown of the profits and losses, which is the money that's going in and out, which assets they have, so what things the company owns, the subsidiaries they own, and then the ownership who owns them. And usually there's also special sections about investments. In the methodology, we break down specifically which parts you can find information about investments and investors. So this is the main point to remember, is that in a company accounts, you will not only find who is investing in the company, you will also find what the company is investing in. So both information about investors and investments. So this is the breakdown we have in the methodology. This is too detailed and too long, and maybe a bit too technical and boring to go over in a webinar. So yes, you can look at this in more detail in the methodology. And here I'll go over another example. This is again from the Coca-Cola company. This is from one of their filings, from their accounts. And here is, for example, in this critical accounting policies section, they talk about some of their assets, and they say that in November 2021, that's the third paragraph on this page, they acquired ownership of the remaining 85%, so now own 100% of BA Sports Nutrition. So this is an example of how it's mentioned what they are investing in. Okay, and then now let's think about how we go the other way. Like maybe you're not interested in a company doing specific wrongdoing. Maybe you're interested in a bank that's known to invest in companies that have done environmental wrongdoing. For this mainly will refer you to a bunch of organizations that do analysis of investors, like these ones: BankTrack, Forest and Finance, Forest 500. Forest 500 is really good. It identifies both the companies and the financial institutions, so the people that invest in the companies, like banks and funds, with the greatest exposure to tropical deforestation risk, which is really cool. And you can maybe look up on their website specific reports that are relevant to your geographic area of interest. A really important thing that I encourage journalists to always do is, when you're looking at investors, also look at their sustainability commitments, because a lot of them will have public statements saying, oh, from now on, our bank is not going to invest into any deforestation anymore, or we're not going to invest in any kind of pollution of the oceans. But that's where you can really hold them to account, is when they actually do that. You find a trail where they're doing that, and then you can compare it to those commitments. Stand Earth, which is an activist organization, a research organization, did a really good side-by-side comparison of investments and the commitments by European banks vis-a-vis gas and oil investments. It's a really good example of how to lay it out clearly. And now I am passing it over to my colleague, Maddie Ngunga, who will talk a bit about development banks.
Thank you, Yelto. Thank you so much. I'm Madeleine Gunga. I'm Africa editor at the Pulitzer Center. So I will talk a bit about development bank. Just a little reminder to say that they are also known as development finance institution, and they have been encouraged by the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development since 1915. Both of them are tied to nation and states, and they are supposed to promote development in places struggling with poverty and instability. And for that reason, you will see most of their projects in Africa, in Asia. But what most the journalists in our network found is that many projects financed by Development Bank are tied to pollution, deforestation in rainforest area, or in ocean projects in many parts of the world, and mainly in global South country. So this is why it's important to really investigate, because it's state money financing companies that are involved in wrongdoing, environmental wrongdoing in some of the areas that are most affected by environmental damage in the world. Next slide, please. So you can see here the type of investment that we can get from Development Bank. It can be funds, or it can also be loans. So through this type of finance, they can finance agricultural projects or infrastructural projects. So let's say in a country there is a dam, a project to build a dam. A company will receive the money to build that dam, and maybe the dam can have impacts on environmental, on the environment, or in community living in a specific area. So there are different type of funds. They can be short-term finance, or it can be long-term finance in different projects where these development banks are involved in the global South. Next slide. So this is just an example of how these companies or these development banks are investing around the world. These are some data from 2020, according to France Development Agency, which is also linked to some of the development banks that, like you will see in next slide. The next slide. So where can we find information about the project financed by Development finance institution. Let's say, for example, you have a project financed by the World Bank. The first place to start will be in their website. They usually list investment online. If you go on the World Bank website, you will see some investment, some project where they have put investment. If you also go into Asian Development Bank, you'll be able to see a list of projects. So when it comes to Africa, a lot of journalists will say it's difficult sometimes to track projects in Africa, or to track investor behind the project. So what we mention in our stories with Realtor is that you can track project finance by, for example, African Development Bank using their platform. This is one really interesting example. It's called Map Africa. When you open, it's a map with a lot of projects in many countries, and you can just click in one specific project. You will see who is financing the project, in which specific area the project is supposed to take place, and many things about the investor and the development institution involved in the project. So these are a couple of examples of places where you can go to look for information on maybe the amount of the money for that project, or the different partner involved in that specific project. Next slide. I think it's all. I really encourage you to go through the website and read the full story, which we put a lot of link inside the story, so you'll be able to dig more into how to investigate this development finance institution and all these investor behind the environmental destruction around the world. So I will pass it on to Jenna. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline, and great presentation. That was very interesting. I'm going to look at some of that stuff. Some of that was new to me. First, I just want to say thank you to Pulitzer Center for having me. My name is Jenna Dolacek, and I'm an investigator with the Center for Information Resilience. The Center for Information Resilience seeks to collect and analyze and document user-generated content, also known as social media, showing possible human rights violations, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, as well as disinformation and other projects. I've been working on human rights violations and war crimes investigations for about 7 years now. And I currently work on the Myanmar Witness and Eyes on Russia project. And I was previously with the UN at the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar. Today, I'll be talking to you about using open sources for corporate investigation, and you'll all be sent a copy of this presentation afterwards, so please don't worry about trying to memorize or screenshot anything. Everything that's underlined is a hyperlink that does work, so you'll be able to access all of that after the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go over very quickly open source investigation overview, because I think we have some different skill levels here. Types of business entities, corporate databases, trade and shipping records, using social media, network mapping, and working backwards. All right, so as you all know, open source, OSINT stands for open source intelligence. However, all open source really is just a type of source. It's simply another form of information. There's kind of a lot of misconceptions kind of about what open source is out there. Another acronym you may have heard is OSINT, or open source information, and it can be physical or digital. You know, we just obtain our information through open sources that we then incorporate into what some call an open source investigation, or OSINT. But really, there's no such thing as open source investigation. It's just carrying out an investigation using or solely relying on open sources. So then people just kind of refer to it that way. Same thing goes for analysis. Your analysis is just observation, pattern recognition, you know, connecting the dots, seeing anomalies, and the application of logic and contextual knowledge. So intelligence is what you get after you've analyzed your information and you've given it meaning and insight. And so that's kind of what makes it actionable to the client, or maybe whoever's publishing your findings. So in an investigation, you're using the intelligence cycle. which, you form your question, carry out your research, gather your data, analyze it, which then results in intelligence. So, and then methodology comes in when you decide what resources to interrogate, maybe which search streams to use, what platforms to use, or what data sets you use and why. So ultimately, open source and digital information is really just research. But you're using open source information and its resulting insights can increase the integrity of your reporting by diversifying your sources and then corroborating that or other information with open or closed sources. So it's really all just information gathering at the end of the day. And one more thing is, yes, open source is about finding your operators. So your keywords, your information, and then investigation is about leveraging those operators. So that's investigation in a nutshell. All right, so on the corporate note, types of business entities, which the previous presentation touched on a little bit, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on this because everybody can look them up and find more detail, but there's many different types of companies. So the ones in yellow are the ones that you're probably going to come across the most in this type of investigation for criminal activity or wrongdoing or anything like that. Doesn't mean you'll never come across the other ones, but the ones in yellow are likely to be more common for our investigation. So it's just good to know what kinds are out there because it'll help you understand a company's structure, how it operates, what positions individuals may hold, and what their responsibilities may include. And so one of the biggest red flags in entities is shell companies. So just really quick, this is a good diagram that I found online that helps kind of explain what a shell company is. So it's typically an LLC, which was one of those highlighted in yellow on the previous slide. They really don't have any operations or revenue streams. The people involved don't really have a lot of involvement in daily operations. And a lot of them tend to be registered offshore, such as in Panama or the Bahamas or other Caribbean islands. And they typically have little to no physical assets, no equipment or property. And then a few other red flags down here at the bottom, maybe unusual transaction patterns, maybe very high value, maybe very low value. Like once again, a registry in a location that lacks transparency rules. And then if you're lucky enough to get a hold of some financial reporting, just inconsistencies in those records and reporting is a red flag. And then unknown transactions with unknown sources. That's obvious. That's also a very big red flag. Okay, moving on. So there's lots of different corporate databases, which we also saw in the previous presentation. And even I had to remind myself that banks are also companies. So banks can even fall under corporate and companies as well. So one of the most well-known and common one is Open Corporates. It gives you pretty much all basic company registration, such as when it was registered, where, by whom, the type of industry, and some other information. And then countries tend to also have their own corporate registries. So the US, the SEC's company search that Pulitzer mentioned, UK's company house, and then I did not link a Russian government company registry just in case anybody's operational security is not quite set up. So this is a non-government registry, but it is in Russian, so you will need Google Translate. But generally you can just Google, country and corporate registry and possibly find the country that you're looking for. Offshore leaks is good for information that came from like the Panama Papers, Cambridge Analytica, those types of things. Next is the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. And this was actually founded by journalists and does report on corruption and organized crime. But they have a searchable database called Aleph, which you can search individuals or business entities on. And then we have Open Sanctions. This tells you who or what business either is under sanctions or has been sanctioned, where, when, and why. And then each country tends to have its own sanctions list as well. So UK, EU, US, so on. And then finally, PACER is the open access database of legal documents in the US. So maybe you want to know an individual or a company's previous history. Have they been involved in litigation or wrongdoing before? PACER can help with that. But also, like the previous presentation said, always look through a company's website because A, you can find a lot of basic information, individuals, investors, things like that. But maybe what they put on their website does not match with other information you found. So that can be an anomaly or a red flag there. But always give the website a thorough look through. And yeah, if you ever forget any of these, a simple Google search, you know, sanctions registry, corporate registry, things like that, that'll help you out. Okay, next we have trade and shipping records. So if you ever want to know where something has come from and going, trade and shipping records will help with that. So Panjiva is a very big database that can tell you what company made a shipment, when that shipment was made, the weight, value, and type of cargo. But unfortunately, you have to have a paid account to figure out where that shipment went to. So maybe we're looking at you know, raw materials, or, you know, wood, metals, hazardous materials, or any kind of resource extraction like that. But maybe it's post-processing of those materials and we want to know where it went to. Panjiva might be able to help. And if with the information it gives you, you may be able to search all that and find out where it went without a paid Panjiva account. So it's all about finding these little pieces of information and further searching them to once again uncover more information or find another lead. So the International Trade Administration, it is US based and it is mostly about trading with the US, but they have quite a few data types you can filter by. So that can come in handy. And then shipping trackers. So for aircraft, Flight Radar 24 is a really big one. And you can filter down to the type of aircraft, like cargo or business. But if you have something like a CEO's private jet, the tail number, you can search aircraft tail numbers and you can see its history, you know, where it came from, where it's going. So if you're trying to track anything, that's very helpful. You can also just look at a specific airport and see all the traffic in and out of there too. So maybe you're able to match something from there. Track and trace. This is probably not going to be the most handy because you have to have some very specific information for it, but it's still good to be aware of it because you never know. But if you have air cargo numbers, container numbers, bills of lading, you can search those within that database and get more information about those shipments. And then for marine vessels, ships, we have Marine Traffic and Vessel Finder. They are very similar, but they do have some different data filtering. So you might want to play with both of them, but once again, you can filter down to cargo or business, you know, things like that. And then finally, for trains, there's shockingly very little data on trains that are not passenger trains because kind of transport trains don't have set schedules. So there's really no good way to track that. However, if maybe you're trying to figure out, you know, where a common route something is used or where it's going, where it came from, this open railway map has a visualization of railroads. So, or maybe you have a photo from something and, you know, maybe that can help geolocate. So it's always good to have some of these tools, even if you think they may not come the most handy, because with most investigation, you never know. All right, and next we have everybody's favorite, social media. So always look at a company's page, profile, channel, depending on the type, the platforms that they have, because you can get, again, some general information from there. But maybe you can also find any subsidiaries or associated business profiles connected with those pages as well. And then always, always, always look at the profiles or public pages of any members of the executive or management, because you never know what's out there. People like to put all kinds of stuff online. And then once you've identified those individuals, always look at their spouses and children. That may sound kind of odd, but it's a very common practice to hide assets in family members' names to avoid sanction or seizure. Excuse me here. Oh, apologies. There we go. And then once you've identified them, you know, look at their friends and their associates, because once again, you never know what they put out there. Maybe you know, the CEO wasn't posting about his trip, but maybe a friend that was on the trip with him did. and there's pictures of everybody or where they are. So a lot of open source investigation is very time consuming, but you'd be really, really surprised what you can find online. And because why? People like to show off. So you can uncover things like sanctioned violations, illegal activity, questionable purchases, suspect locations, and further interesting connections. So don't ever discount people's social media because maybe they're showing off inexpensive cars, clothes, or multiple homes. So they could be hiding assets, or maybe it's even a cover. So it's always good to constantly compare the information that you're finding. Right. And then a quick word on network mapping. So network mapping or link charting, link analysis, it's many names for the same thing. But basically, we're just mapping connections between people and also entities. So it can help you uncover connections, see a wider network, and visualize who is involved with whom or what. We get a lot of information. Things can get very messy. Things can get very complex. So kind of mapping it out and visualizing it can help put things into, perspective. And a few tools that can do this. A popular one is Maltego. That's traditionally used for more traditional investigation like law enforcement because it has some other investigative functions. But it does have a mapping function, and I believe the free version does also include that mapping function as well. There's Neo4j or Linkurious. That is a very popular one among NGOs, but I believe it is paid. And then there's Kumu, which you can get a free account, but unfortunately, what you then make is public. So either don't put sensitive information into it, or name it kind of something random that's not connected, so then maybe it doesn't come up in a search on what you're working on, or you can get a paid account that's then private. You can also just do it by hand in PowerPoint. Time consuming, but if there are security or financial issues, then that might be your option. And so I really love this example done by TSC. So this is a very in-depth one, but it's all about Putin's sphere of influence. So the way they set it up is they kind of have his most inner circle, a lot of whom are government individuals, and they have a little bit more of a secondary connection. But then you can see all these little lines, and you can start seeing how everything is interconnected. Who is connected to who is involved with what companies, and ultimately all of this leads back to one person. So depending on your investigation, it'll be up to you how to visualize this, what information to incorporate. Maybe you have a few different versions, but this is just a handy way to kind of keep organized and to see sort of, the bigger picture and maybe find some other things. All right, and then we have what I call kind of working backwards. So a lot of times in investigation, we rarely kind of have the first piece that you need. And we're always trying to find out what happened afterwards. So that's kind of why I went for the working backwards theme. So what if you don't know what company to look into? What if you don't know who owns the land or the factory or shipping transport? Maybe you're trying to find your next investigation. And a lot of times we don't have that first piece. So maybe you're looking at maps or satellite imagery, and you come across either a business or a factory, or maybe you find a section of deforested land or something like that. Google Maps is a really, really, really good resource when it comes to businesses. So people, I'm sure most of us have used Google Maps when we're searching for something, but when there is a business, there's a pin. You can click on that pin and it'll bring up basic information for that company, the name, phone number, address, maybe website. But people can also leave reviews, and you would be surprised what people will put in those reviews. So I also suggest looking through those. But then they can also attach photos to that business as well. So maybe you're trying to confirm the location of a business or just trying to figure out what it looks like. Look through those attached photos. People post them on the outside of the building, the inside of the building. So you can get a lot of information just from a general Google business entry. That next is just general searching or search strings, Boolean searching, advanced searching, kind of whatever you want to call it. So for example, here I have a string that says, maybe you're trying to find out what company is maybe extracting a certain resource and in what country. So for example, just some basic ones, cobalt exporters in the Democratic Republic of Congo, teak producers in Myanmar, or palm oil companies in Indonesia. You can start with a general search and try to find lists of companies that are operating either in these countries or maybe export to other countries, importing countries even. And then you just kind of, process of elimination from there. And then online stores, online retailers, Amazon, Temu, things like that. You can maybe identify brands that are maybe selling problematic products or products that were used with maybe sanctioned materials or something like that. And even identify their suppliers, where they got it from. And then finally, maybe for deforestation or mining resource extraction, you need to know who owns the land potentially. So some countries do have land ownership registries, but it will vary wildly because the US has really good resources on that. Europe probably has decent resources. Outside of that, it's really going to depend. But you might be able to find information in the deeds and who owns that property, or that could potentially help you uncover maybe who owns the license for mining on that land, who leases that land, who approved the licenses, things like that. And then transportation companies. Maybe we need to know who's moving this material that should not be moved, and determining what transport companies operate in what countries maybe can help uncover that, who they originally got the materials from, or where they're going and who they're going to be used by. So that includes, railways, ships, again, aircraft, things like that. In the US, it's pretty easy to narrow down semi-trucking, ground transportation companies. And then finally, we have raw materials suppliers. So who actually supplies oil, gas, iron, steel, wood, petrochemicals, or elements needed for electronics, cobalt, gold, things like that. We can find out who are some of the biggest companies in the world, or who just operates in certain countries. So I know that was a lot of information in a small time, but just some additional resources as well. It's almost impossible to know all of the tools and resources and databases out there. So I always tell everybody, work smarter, not harder, and use things like dashboards to help you get unstuck. Or if you can't think of what to do next, or what tool to use, or what's even available. These dashboards all have hundreds of tools. They all include geolocation and social media, but some of them have more resources in certain categories. For example, Bellingcat's dashboard has some environmental tools as well as a business and corporate section. This next one, called OSINT for Finding People, it has a very large public records section, mostly for the US, but also some from Europe. And this Cipher 387 at the bottom here, once again, just has a really good collection of tools. And there's a lot of overlap between them. And then if you're just curious about some other investigations, we all know Bellingcat, they're very good. Global Witness is another good one. And then C4ADS, I've worked with in the past, and they focus on disrupting illicit trade networks. And then if you're interested in kind of the more legal case building or litigation side of environmental crimes, I highly suggest checking out the Center for Climate Crimes Analysis. They do some really great work. And then we also do some really great work at CIR. So keep an eye on us in the future, as we'll have some environmental and corporate investigations coming out. With that, thank you all very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And if there's any questions, I believe we're doing that at the end. So now I will go ahead and throw it to Gloria.
You're on mute, Gloria.
Hello, can everybody see me correctly?
Yes.
Super. So I will share my screen. Just bear with me 2 seconds. Okay. So, Hello, everybody. I see people on the chat. I know, others I don't, but it's very nice to see people from around the world. All of the tools that my colleagues have shared before and all of these tips are incredibly useful and valuable. So I hope you get to have a closer look at them and use them. I want to use this final 15 minutes to present like some examples of my work and how I have used OSINT. So I am a freelance, my name is Gloria Palares. I am a freelance environmental and global development journalist. The Pulitzer Center has supported my work in the Amazon and the Congo Basin. And in these places, I have, with support of the center, uncovered scams or illegal activities that covered an area equivalent to that of Uruguay or Cambodia. And the findings of these investigations have triggered action by indigenous communities, by decision makers, and have informed like official investigations, for example, into the legality of forestry titles. So this is what I will try to cover in this next 15 minutes. First of all, I will quickly describe the investigation from which I will draw examples for my presentation. And then I would like to discuss three ideas or three topics. First one, the importance of looking out for wrongdoing that is hiding in plain sight. Second, your job as investigators in collecting and connecting the dots and how you can use open sources to do that. And finally, the importance of bringing to light through your investigations with open sources, not only the offenders and their crimes, but also the negligence from the actors that were supposed to protect communities and to protect the forest. So very quickly, this is the investigation I will be referring to. This was a Pulitzer Center-supported story. It ran earlier this year. And as you can see, it's about a series of companies that swindled indigenous communities in 3 countries, that is Panama, Peru, and Bolivia, and convinced them to give away their rights to millions of acres of forest, an area approximately the size of Portugal. Essentially, what they was asking communities to relinquish their rights to the ecosystem services of these forests. So the companies could commodify these services and trade them. How? For example, through bonds or through biodiversity credits or through carbon credits. This was like the outcome of the investigation. You can see in the left, we found that it touched like 3 countries, 9 indigenous communities and groups. It even involved the government, and it involved 12 private entities. And then in the screen, you can also see some organizations and initiatives that sever ties with these companies as a result of the investigation. Okay, so we have already seen through previous presentations lots of very helpful tools and tricks. But what I would like is to highlight the following. First of all, we have to be aware that in some cases, we really need some very complex and sometimes very expensive platforms to be able to conduct our investigations. But in other cases, we need very little, maybe only access to internet. And we can really uncover some pretty big schemes. This is the case when the people that are committing these offenses or this wrongdoing are not really hiding. When does this happen most? When we are talking about highly technical sectors, for example, I know there are some of you who are familiar with the world of carbon credits. This can be extremely technical. Then often these sectors like green cryptocurrencies or sustainable development bonds, these areas are very vague. What does it mean? There's no international definition for what sustainable finance is. There are no standards, no impact indicators, etc. the fact that it's vague also means it is most of the time unregulated. There is no laws, there is no policies, there is no sanctions. We're talking also about sectors that are presented as being good for people and the planet, right? So if you invest in my scheme, you will be saving tropical forests and providing a better life for indigenous communities. This sounds pretty good. And finally, and very important, these sectors must be profitable, or they must hold promise for being profitable in the near future. When all of these things happen, bad actors see opportunity. And what happens is that the economic benefits, or that the possibility of having economic benefits, outweighs the risks of being held accountable, even if they are caught. Because if something is not regulated, if there are no standards, maybe what I can do is ethically questionable, but still I cannot go to jail, right? Some risk sectors, I've already described them. I know some of you are familiar with them: sustainable and green finance, carbon credits, any certifications related to like sustainability, etc., etc. Okay, and also bear in mind that opportunistic actors tend to, dip their toes in several, not one, but several of these sectors. Like this person you see here to the left, he is a co-leader of one of the involved organizations. And you see he was dealing in SDG certificates, eco-labels, green crypto, carbon neutral, fossil fuels, whatever this is, SDG bonds, etc., etc. And the interesting thing is that we will discuss this later with some specific examples. All of these things you can find them just searching online. Now, what I did with this investigation, and I guess it's the case for a lot of investigations, is you can use open sources, such as social media, for example, or the websites of companies that Jenna mentioned, to collect the pieces that the different involved actors have dropped, and then put the puzzle back, like to show the world what the scheme looks like. So the principle is extremely simple. You get started with some bit of information. In my case, it was a contract with the name of a company, 2 allies, and a couple of businessmen, and this was a starting point. From there, you pivot from one snippet of information to the next using tools like the ones we have seen previously. And what I encourage you, and we will see now in the examples, is to make the most of free sources of information. So just for examples, from like showing what you can achieve really without spending any money, and essentially Googling, right? Somebody uploaded a document, a PDF, on a website called StuDoku. Then somebody took it from StuDoku, downloaded it, and uploaded it on Script, which is a digital document library which has been incredibly helpful in this investigation. What is it that somebody, an anonymous person, uploaded on Script? Well, actually, it was a document produced by a company, one of the companies that was swindling indigenous communities in Peru. And what the document showed is that, you see, the businessman was not only planning to make money by selling like SDG bonds or carbon credits or whatever to international investors and getting a cut, getting a commission, then he was planning to use that money to undertake like development projects in the community. So in a way, you see, he was expecting to make money twice. And of course, these projects were preposterous and were overpriced. Just for some greenhouses, he was talking about like $400,000, which is obviously ridiculous. And this, you see, this is something that you could find online in an open platform. Another example So I continued digging, and this person turned out to be under investigation for embezzling public money, which was targeting like people in a situation of poverty. Again, more searches yielded this document below. This is an investor pitch deck, which explained that they wanted to take all the money, including the money of the communities, offshore to avoid paying taxes. So see how all these things are online. This means that the businessmen behind these schemes were really not afraid of being caught or being held to account. Otherwise, they would have probably been more careful, right? So another example, there was, so this website to the left showed that there was a Panamanian institution involved in the scheme. So here we have a new country, first Peru, then Bolivia, then Panama. And the director of the cooperative said, well, I have nothing to do with this scheme. It's entirely the fault of my predecessor. Again, an online search in a public corporate registry showed that the current director and the previous director were actually partners. Partners in crime, we could say quite literally, were partners in a company that intended to provide fiduciary services for the scheme in Panama. So not only was this organization very much aware of what was happening, but they were hoping to benefit economically from this scheme, which they knew was completely a ripoff for indigenous communities. Now we've been talking about like individuals and private companies, but again, looking at the report of one of these organizations, and this report was online and was accessible to anybody. What I saw looking at this report was that actually this organization had met with the government of Panama, with a national bank, with the Ministry of Finance and Economy. I mean, there was a lot of people in this meeting. It was pretty formal. And the meeting was to discuss like a plan to issue millions of securities based on the value of forests in indigenous lands. And all of this happened only a few weeks afterwards. The government had issued a statement, a press release saying, we have nothing to do with these companies who are engaging our indigenous communities. So it's incredible. You can find this type of information in the report of the company, and that's online. And just the last example, another company claimed, you know, they are doing these great things for indigenous communities while they are waiting for the SDG bonds money to fall from the trees. And one of the great things they are doing for the communities is supporting indigenous firefighters. So they show photos of their activities with these firefighters. But if you put this photo into a reverse image search service like PMIS, what you see is that this photo was originally taken from the website of a really legit NGO that has been working in Bolivia for more than 20 years. So again, these companies are like liars all around. And all of this is out there for anybody who is interested to research and to see. Many connections emerged. I won't dwell on these long. Simply, you see, some of the allies of these companies were a Canadian carbon company, a well-known carbon company who is working to get the NASDAQ listed, American lithium investor, a former candidate to the Brazilian Senate. All of this information was obtained from online open sources that were free or nearly for free. And this brings me to the very last slide, which is, if somebody with enough time, with enough drive, can find, and enough determination, can find all this evidence online, so much evidence, like hundreds of pages of documents. couldn't the international NGOs that partnered with these organizations find out? Couldn't the people at the ministries who sat down with these people find out? Couldn't the Canadian companies who to this day are still partnering with these organizations find out? Couldn't the multilateral organizations whose names were being used to market the schemes all over, couldn't they find out, right? So this means that the more exposed the wrongdoing is, as this was the case, the most glaring, the most flagrant is the failure of those who are supposed to conduct due diligence and oversight. So I really encourage all of you to watch out for all the sketchy schemes hiding in plain sight. As I'm speaking now, you have tons of them lying out there in across all regions. So I encourage you to look for them, to connect and collect the dots, pivoting from one snippet of information to the next, however small that nugget of information may be. And remember what Jenna just said before, that it's amazing how people love to show off and to peacock, and to what extent that makes them fearless. And they post all sorts of things online and in their LinkedIn accounts, Facebook, Instagram accounts, etc. Very interesting. Also, I want to highlight this, looking at as Jenna said before, looking at the profiles of family members. You will find a lot of things in there. And finally, also take the opportunity, which I know you're probably doing, but just remind you to take the opportunity to shine a light on the offenders, but also on the governance failures that make these activities possible. Thank you very much, and over to you, Fernanda, and to the questions.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I feel that I learned so much from you all today. We don't have time for many questions. We answered most of them through text, but there's two that I wanted to go over, Mike. Homolus, he's asking Jenna, and I think that Madeline can also pitch in. How can we go about OSINT investigation in Africa when some companies don't have even a website presence or don't share a lot of content online? What are alternatives to investigate these companies?
I guess I can go first, but Madeline may have some other suggestions. But what you don't really need all of these databases. You really just need general searching. But it'll likely be a lot of secondary sources. So maybe other websites or documents referring to that company without having a general website, but that's okay. You don't always need direct sources, especially if they don't exist. Then you do the best with what you can with your other sources. But you can also reach out. I mean, feel free to reach out to other organizations that have done investigations in this area or that are based in Africa, and see what they have to say, what resources they use. You'd be really, really surprised how willing people are in this field to help each other. So I've definitely done that when I wasn't aware of kind of the area or something that I was searching. So I would say it's just going to be a lot of secondary, tertiary type of information that you're going to get a hold of at first. And Madeline, I'll say if you have any other suggestions as well.
Yeah, I just in addition to what you just suggested, I would say one thing also to get information from this company is to talk to communities. It's even for the fact that you don't have information online is an information for us as journalists. Like if you are looking for a company and you don't find information online, is something that you can also highlight in your story. The fact to speak to community also help, because what the company is doing on the ground is really important. It's not just looking at the investor, but what they are doing on the ground can inform maybe the person who invests in those companies. And the last thing I can add is that usually those companies gets fund or money from other company, and they have to write the report and share with the founder. And sometimes through the website of founder, you can get information on some company or people involved in specific company, even if they don't have website. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenna and Madeline. And then the last question, I think it would be great if all of you answered, so we can say goodbye to our audience, which is somebody's asking, what is a good first step to get more into OSINT, to find out investors, to find out money flows behind environmental crimes? So if you could all just offer a piece of inspiration to the journalists watching us, and let's start with Yelter, and then you all can popcorn to each other.
Yeah, I think often we hit roadblocks, but there's lots of ways around those, like what Jenna and Maddie mentioned before. I think always try to have an open mind and be creative in your OSINT research. If you can't find out something about a company, look up the managers, look up the owners, look up former employees, see what they're tied to. Do some weird searches on Google, like look for PDFs or PowerPoint presentations. You'll often find little nuggets of gold out there.
Yeah, I can go. So what I would suggest is that when investigating this financial company, one thing that really helped me, for example, is to look at what they promise. So what is their target or what is their objective? Compare what they aim with what they are actually doing on the ground, because usually they will claim that they have sustainable policy, they have a lot of things in place. And when you will compare with what they are doing on the ground, it will help you to really show what is wrong in their claim. Thank you.
I was the original question how to get into OSINT, was that correct?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So there's a lot of different ways, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of time to get into that now, but thankfully there's some individuals and organizations that have kind of put together some guides with suggestions on how to get into it. There's lots of open source kind of forums and groups now. So I know it's going to sound a little lame, but it's actually what I did when I got started too. And Google how you get into OSINT. You'll come across a lot of the organizations. SANS is a big one. And then CIR, Bellingcat, for if you want more of the human rights side. There's other environmental groups. So you could even add environmental OSINT, corporate OSINT. There's cybersecurity, law enforcement, defense, and journalism, lots of different kinds. But you'll identify the major people in the fields, go look at what they have to say, what resources they post. There's lots of free trainings, so many YouTube tutorials. You know, Ben Strick, who's also with me at CIR, posts a lot of really, really good stuff. So honestly, just start by doing your very first open source step and search and see what you find and go from there.
And Claudia, would you like to say final words?
Final word. Well, I agree with everything that all of my colleagues have said, but I would say if you're a journalist, you are already into OSINT because you have already looked at things up, right? And you have already explored documents and you have already Googled and looked at the websites of companies. So you just need to continue treading that way using all of the ideas and the resources that I think we collectively share today.
Great. Thank you all so much. And thank you to everybody watching us today. Thank you for participating in this webinar. I'll be sure to send the presentations your way and really appreciate it. Have a good rest of your days. Bye-bye.